It's recording. Thanks, Annika.
All right, and audio still coming in clear? Do we need the mic? Okay, thumbs up. Thanks, Donnie. All right, we conducted the fourth workshop last month in July, and we covered the administrative requirements in Annex Y. A recording of that workshop, in addition to all other workshops, is available on our website. We will also be recording today's workshop. Annalyn has started recording. You're one step ahead of me, Luke. So questions can be entered into the Q&A box in Zoom today, and we'll do our best to field these as time permits. The Q&A function can be located on the bottom navigation bar in Zoom, and questions can be voted higher on the list by clicking the thumbs up icon. Comments can be submitted to Commerce using the form we've posted on our webpage, and we really value your input and comments. We actively use this information to better shape administrative rules to meet your needs, so please continue to be engaged throughout the process. Next slide, please. All right, Commerce's mission is to strengthen communities. We do this through a broad range of policy and programs, including housing and homelessness, business assistance, community services, and our work, which is situated within the State Energy Office. Next slide. So I wanted to provide just real brief introductions to our team. Our entire team is dedicated to providing timely, actionable, and clear information about the state's Clean Buildings Law. My name is Emily Salzberg, and I'm the Managing Director for the Buildings Unit within the State Energy Office. Your presenters for today are going to be Judy Darst, Donnie Westfall, and Luke Howard, who are technical leads for Clean Buildings. And you'll also be hearing from Annalyn Bergen, who's our program manager and focuses much of her time on outreach, education, and communications. We work with a talented team of staff focused on database development, policy development, and program implementation. Next slide. So for today, we plan to focus on Tier 1 buildings for today's workshop, which is a little bit different because we've been really focused on Tier 2 buildings as part of this rulemaking. We will review the existing standard as it applies to Tier 1 buildings as a foundation for the discussion. And we'll then discuss a few proposals that would update requirements for Tier 1 buildings to better align with Tier 2 and also to reflect a few changes that we've heard from stakeholders over the last several years. These would assist with clarity and compliance with the law. Next slide. All right, we have one more workshop planned after today's workshop, which will be a cumulative review and will take place in early September. We're also hosting a series of in-person meetings in early September. These will be in Seattle, Spokane, and Kennewick, September 10th through 12th. Annalyn, is there anything you want to add about the in-person meetings?
Please register. Some of them are limited to the in-person part. The virtual should be unlimited.
Great, thank you. Next slide. All right, Liz, I think this is to you.
Thank you, Emily, and good morning. Liz Reichart, Senior Energy Policy Specialist here. This slide just serves as a reminder that both during and after each workshop, there will be an opportunity for public engagement, input, and feedback on our draft language. So this is a cycle that continues throughout all of our workshops. You know, our goal with this rulemaking is really to be inclusive and participatory and make folks feel seen and heard in the final rules that are put forward. So we encourage you to show up. We only ask that you please be respectful, please show good Zoom manners by using the chat. That's it. Back over to Emily.
All right, next slide, please, Annika. Annika's driving, right? Okay. Thanks, Annika. Thanks, Liz. All right, so this slide is a summary timeline for major milestones for Tier 2 requirements for clean buildings. So the first phase of Commerce's requirements under the law are focused on rulemaking, and Liz just reviewed our process for that. Commerce is required to provide building owner notification by July of 2025 and to launch the incentive program on that same timeline. The first reporting cycle for Tier 2 buildings will take place in July of 2027. Commerce will be evaluating benchmarking data following the 2027 reporting cycle and may make a recommendation to the legislature to adopt a performance standard for Tier 2 buildings, which would come into place in 2031. I want to take a moment to focus on the time between our final workshop and rules becoming effective. So that's just the middle of that timeline. So during this time, as we mentioned and Annalyn talked about, we're going to be doing in-person meetings around the state. We will also be hosting a public hearing regarding the rulemaking. We'll be publishing the Small Business Economic Impact Statement as required by law, and we'll be filing forms CR 102 and 103, which codifies our work here with rulemaking. Anything you want to add to that?
Nope, you've got it.
Okay, next slide, please, Annika. Great, over to you.
Okay, hello, everyone. I just want to reintroduce myself. I'm Annalyn Bergen. I'm a program manager with the Clean Buildings team. So I'm going to summarize the public comments we've received since last workshop, which covered Annex Y. That's a new section in the standard that covers administrative requirements for Tier 2. So you can view all comments that we've received on the comment dashboard. We'll enter a link in the chat, but it's also posted on the Clean Buildings homepage. Next slide. So we received feedback to expand on what qualifies for a compliance extension. It was suggested to elaborate on extenuating circumstances. It was also suggested to clarify if the energy management plan and the operations and maintenance program needs to be operationalized for 1 full year prior to the compliance date. In addition, it was suggested to clarify compliance for mixed-use buildings, such as a building with commercial use and condominiums. So we appreciate the suggestions and we hope we could provide more clarity in the language. So we also received comments concerning the application of Senate Bill 5722 to schools and cost and time commitment for compliance for private schools. Exempt building types and uses are listed in law. Schools are not listed as an exempt building type. We hear you on the cost and time commitment concerns. We hope we can establish resources, financial incentives, and assistance to better support you in compliance. Next slide. So other comments received suggest removing of sole ownership from the multifamily residential building definition to ensure that condos are included with Tier 1 covered buildings. The concerns were that legislation did not specifically exempt condos and buildings with multiple owners. And that in itself is an equity issue in which lower income residents will live in units subject to the standard, in which higher income will live in exempt units. There was also suggested definition for building owners and contiguous property. You know, we appreciate this point of view. We're expected to have further discussions regarding condos. I just want to thank everyone for their submission. Your feedback, comments, and suggestions are extremely valuable as we draft rules for this program. We want you to feel heard, respected, and comfortable collaborating with us. If you haven't submitted comments, it's not too late. Please review the proposed language, watch the recordings, and submit your comments. All of these links can be found in our homepage. We'll enter the link in the comments. We'll enter the comment form in the chat, that link. And that's it for a comment summary. I'll send it to Judy now. Next slide.
Thank you, Annalyn. My name is Judy Darst. I'm a technical specialist with Clean Buildings. As Emily mentioned, the information presented in this series of workshop and in the rulemaking process have applied to Tier 2 covered buildings. Today, we are focusing on Tier 1 covered buildings. I'm going to give a brief recap of Tier 1. Next slide. The Clean Buildings Law, House Bill 1257, was authorized in the 2019 legislative session. The Clean Building Performance Standard is based on ASHRAE Standard 100, which covers energy efficiency in existing buildings. This is the reference standard. In WAC 19450, Commerce developed amendments to the Standard 100 to conform to the Clean Buildings legislation. So the integrated document developed by ASHRAE that incorporates all state amendments to the Standard 100 can be downloaded through our Clean Buildings website, and we'll post the link in the chat. This law charged Commerce with rulemaking, notifying building owners, administrating off incentives, supporting mandatory compliance. Next slide. This is a breakdown of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard by section. in this current rulemaking, we are making edits to these existing sections. And as you can see, adding a new section for Annex Y, which is specific to Tier 2 covered buildings. Next slide. This standard applies to covered buildings, which will include Tier 1 and Tier 2. Again, today's focus is on Tier 1 clarifications, corrections, and amendments. The standard defines a Tier 1 covered building as a building where the sum of the non-residential hotel, motel, and dormitory floor areas exceeds 50,000 gross square feet, excluding the parking garage area. A building complex is defined within the Clean Buildings Performance Standard as a group of buildings interconnected by conditioned spaces on contiguous property. Next slide. The basic requirements of the standard, similar to Tier 2, Tier 1 requires benchmarking, the implementation of operations and maintenance program, and an energy management plan. Where Tier 1 differs from Tier 2 is that Tier 1 also requires compliance with the energy performance metric, either by meeting the energy use intensity target, the EUIT, or pursuing the investment criteria compliance path, which requires an energy audit and implementation of cost-effective energy efficiency measures. Next slide. This table summarizes the differences between Tier 1 and Tier 2 covered buildings. Tier 1 covered buildings are buildings greater than 50,000 square feet. This does not include multifamily residential buildings. Tier 1 must comply with a Clean Buildings Performance Standard, which includes benchmarking, EMP, and an O&M program, as well as the energy performance metric. The Tier 1 compliance deadline begins in 2026 with the largest cohort of buildings over 220,000 square feet. And the rules are established in the WAC 19450. Tier 2 covered buildings are buildings 20,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet. This does include the multifamily residential buildings greater than 20,000 square feet. Compliance requirements are benchmarking, EMP, O&M program, and the compliance deadline for mandatory reporting is July 1, 2027. The rules will be in the revised WAC 19450 and completed by this December 2023. Now, Donnie will start the review of some of the proposed Tier 1 amendments.
Thanks, Judy. Hello, everyone. My name is Donnie Westfall. I am a technical specialist here with the Clean Buildings team. Today, Luke Howard and I will be covering proposed Tier 1 amendments, providing some background as to why we've made these changes, and discussing some examples of the amendments we're hoping to incorporate. The complete draft document of Tier 1 amendments was emailed out to every workshop participants and is posted to the Commerce's website. We've also put a link to the document in the chat if folks haven't accessed it already. If you get a chance, please take a look and provide your comments via the Tier 2 public comment form posted on the webpage. Next slide, please. Tier 2 rulemaking process has been focused on incorporating Senate Bill 5722 into the existing Clean Buildings Performance Standard. This process has given us the ability to not only accommodate Tier 2 requirements, but also review and assess the existing standard and identify opportunities for clarification, general grammatical cleanup, and to propose some new terms, definitions, and allowances that we feel will help to better align the standard with the intent of the original legislation. So today we'll go through the various reasons for our proposed amendments. As we move through the presentation, I'll be touching on emergency rule update, corrections such as formatting, titles, and grammar, new terms and definitions, and then I'll hand it off to Luke Howard to discuss Tier 2 alignments, clarifications to improve existing language, and changes to Annex Z. Next slide, please. So first off, we've incorporated emergency rule WSR 2305101 into our draft language. Commerce filed this emergency rule change effective February 15th, 2023. The emergency rule expands the time frame for Tier 1 building owners to file for an exemption to the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Language from this emergency rule has been incorporated into our proposed amendments. So if a building meets one of the exemption criteria as outlined in normative Annex Z 4.1, building owners can now apply for an exemption within 3 years before their scheduled compliance date and no later than 180 days prior to the compliance date. So this means Tier 1 buildings over 220,000 square feet can apply for an exemption as of June 1st, 2023. tier 1 buildings between 90,000 and 220,000 square feet can apply for an exemption beginning June 1st, 2024. And buildings between 50,000 and 90,000 can apply for an exemption beginning June 1st, 2025. Within 6 months before a building's compliance date, building owners who have received exemption approval must certify that the building still meets the eligibility qualifications for the exemption and that there have been no material changes to qualifying conditions. Commerce will provide a one-page declaration for exempted building owners to sign for the 6-month recertification. Next slide, please. So next, we've made general corrections to the language that include formatting edits, addition of titles in some places, just general grammatical cleanup. These changes can be seen throughout the integrated document, but we're going to provide a few examples of what those might look like. So in this example here, we made some amendments to Z 4.1, which include adding titles to more easily identify steps in the exemption application process. I've converted numbers from word form to standard form to align with legislative amendments from the emergency rule. And then you'll see the addition of subcategory D here, which was added to incorporate the emergency rule covered in the previous slide. So we've also made corrections just to clean up inconsistencies throughout the document. For example, the standard in its current form uses both energy use intensity and energy utilization index as a definition for EUI. To clean this up, we've amended all references to EUI to use energy use intensity. Next slide. Next, we've made some changes to existing definitions and proposed a few new terms. Some of these changes were based on legislative amendments from Senate Bill 5722, and others were amended by Commerce. The sources are noted in the draft language document. This list was presented at the previous workshop, so I'm not going to go over specific definitions here, but I do want to highlight connected buildings and discuss how this particular term pertains to tier 1 buildings. Next slide. So connected buildings, collection of buildings owned by the same building owner that are situated on the same or adjacent parcels and have shared energy meters. So we introduced this term in the previous workshop as a benchmarking compliance option for tier 2 buildings. Rather than having to sub-meter, tier 2 building owners can benchmark their building's energy use at the connected building level. Similarly, for tier 1 buildings, we're proposing that building owners may pursue compliance through meeting the EUI target at the connected buildings level as an alternative to either sub-metering that tier 1 building or having to pursue compliance through the investment criteria. Pursuing compliance at the connected building level would require aggregating the gross floor area and energy use of all connected buildings to develop an EUI. The EUIT would be developed in accordance with section 7.2 and if applicable 7.2.3 to develop an area weighted EUIT for connected buildings with multiple activity types. So building owners pursuing compliance at the connected building level would be required to implement their energy management plan and operations and maintenance program for the covered buildings only. So the tier 1 and tier 2 covered buildings. So non-covered buildings connected to the shared meter would not need to implement the EMP and O&M program, though it would behoove them, building owners, to do so as it could help to develop a more comprehensive energy management strategy for the entire building portfolio. So in our example here, we've got 3 separate buildings owned by one building owner sharing one energy meter. So they would be allowed to pursue compliance together at the as a connected building. The largest covered building on the right at 64,000 square feet would be used to determine the tier 1 compliance path cohort. And the example here, compliance for this connected building would be required June 1st, 2028, based on the 64,000 square foot, and 10,000 would not move compliance for the connected building into the June 1st, 2027 cohort. The EUI target would be developed at the connected building level with a weighted average for multiple building activities as applicable. And the total aggregated square footage of 110,000 square feet would be used to develop the connected building's EUI. Energy management plan and operations and maintenance program would need to be implemented for the 64,000 square foot building on the right and the 28,000 square foot building on the far left, but not for the 18,000 square foot building in the middle, though it would be recommended. So we really want to encourage folks to submit comments for this proposed language. And as always, if you have any other questions, we'd be happy to discuss this in further detail at the end of the presentation today. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to Luke Howard to discuss Tier 2 alignment, clarifications, and amendments to Annex Z.
Thank you, Donnie. Thanks for spending some extra attention on those specific proposals. It's nice to have some graphics with some of that information. I'm going to burn through a few slides pretty quickly here, and then we're going to jump into the actual proposal document and spend the majority of our time looking through those proposed amendments. So as mentioned previously, today's workshop was developed to introduce proposed changes to the rules that clean up grammatical and formatting errors, add clarity to existing language, and to introduce amendments to Tier 1 rules to align with Senate Bill 5722, so the Tier 2 requirements, and provide greater compliance, flexibility, and options for Tier 1 buildings. So this slide kind of represents a few examples of this work. We'll be reviewing these changes as noted in detail momentarily. Next slide, please. So reporting requirements will continue to be specified in Annex Z of the standard, with some amendments to reflect the effects of the new Tier 2 requirements on current Tier 1 requirements, such as the effect of the introduction of Tier 2 requirements on specific Tier 1 exemptions. The little graphic here to the right, top right, is a excerpt from the proposals we will be reviewing here momentarily, which talks about the effect of 5722 on current Tier 1 exemption requirements. Again, that's this graphic is for visual. We'll be looking at it in larger text here momentarily. Next slide. So as mentioned previously, some of the proposals we have prepared are intended to add clarity to the existing rules and also to provide greater compliance flexibility. Next slide. So general requirements, as many of you know, general compliance requirements are in Annex Z. They were reviewed to add this clarity and provide additional compliance flexibility. Commerce found to be specific pain points to stakeholders. So that's a big topic in our workshop today, is these allowances and adding more flexibility. Again, these are all proposals. We do want to hear comments, both supporting and maybe suggesting edits. These proposals are intended to allow for greater compliance, as I stated, while maintaining the intended energy savings associated with the existing rules. So let's go ahead and move out of the PowerPoint now. I'm going to share my screen and we will take a look at the actual proposal document. So this is almost a cumulative review of the work we've done to date through these Tier 2 workshops. Let's see. Doesn't look like I'm able to.
I'm going to try to share.
Here we go. I got it. Okay. Let me blow this up a little bit for everybody to see a little clearer. Okay, so this language we have introduced with each of our workshops kind of just talks about the rulemaking process and the proposals in this document, how it's formatted. So we underline text indicates additions to the existing rules, strike throughs, text to indicate deletions. The pink highlights on this document are going to identify the Tier 1 amendments. Again, this is pretty much a cumulative review of all the work. So you're going to see underlines and strike throughs for tier 2 amendments to the standard. Today, we're focusing on these pink highlighted comments or areas. So when you see that, I'll likely stop my scroll and we'll spend a little time looking at the details there. And I apologize for all the scrolling. I don't know of a simpler way to do it. I hope not to make anybody too dizzy. So starting off the bat, the scope, we've made some amendments that we proposed already, but I do want to call it out that we have deleted the term commercial in our covered buildings definition. So covered buildings now represent tier 1 and tier 2 requirements. So as I noted, we're not going to be covering all these sections that we have changed. We went over a lot of these in previous workshops, so I'm going to skip all the stuff that we've already reviewed at these workshops and focus on the new additions, mainly affecting tier 1 additions and deletions. So you'll notice here we have our first little pink highlight. So that's just an indication that that does affect tier 1 requirements. So we have previously reviewed this proposal for the connected buildings definition and compliance at a connected building level. I just wanted to highlight that that was previously introduced to represent tier 2 requirements. Donnie just gave us a good detailed synopsis of its application to tier 1 as proposed. A little bit of a lag.
Luke, I just want to mention there's a lot of questions on that connected building
Okay.
term, but we'll get to those questions. We're not gonna forget about those. We're just kind of giving Luke some room to explain some of the new additions.
Yeah, I'm just going to scroll through it in order. We will get back to connected buildings and how it's referenced within the requirements of sections, the various sections in the standard. And Annalyn, if that's an opportune time to take those questions, then we can do that. I'll let you or whoever's Judy, if you see a good time to state those questions within the context of the proposals, then please feel free to speak up. All right, so we had not previously represented this amendment in a previous workshops, but we have, since this would affect tier 1 buildings. It's just kind of expanding the list of and providing more detail on the optionals or the certifications that identify the qualified energy auditor. Again, the qualified person, we did some work to kind of align with Seattle's greenhouse gas building performance legislation, their proposed legislation. This was all just to kind of provide more clarity of the different credentials that meet the requirements of the qualified person. And again, we put some new language in here to allow Commerce to add to that list as we discover new credentials and certification programs that may apply. And we are in the definition section here. I'm not going to cover a whole lot of stuff. We've already covered that in previous workshops. Okay, so now we're getting into section 4. We'll start kind of diving into some of these tier 1 amendments. So first of all, we had to amend 4.1.1.2 to accommodate tier 2 buildings. We've addressed the tier 1 requirements separately from the tier 2. Really no change to the tier 1 requirements. Documentation and submission of the majority of the requirements are to be done by the qualified first person for tier 1. There's been no change to that. And all of these changes we've previously covered. Okay, we have added to this sentence under the implementation of energy efficiency measures to clarify that the implementation of the energy management plan and operations and maintenance program is required in order to gain conditional compliance. So really no new requirement, it's just to add clarity, kind of consolidating some of the requirements into one place. We've added some allowances for verification of compliance for buildings with that can create an EUI that are pursuing the investment criteria. So one of the measurement verification requirements is to meet 75% of the expected savings once these energy efficiency measures are installed. If for some reason the measurement verification does not successfully show that 75% of the predicted savings has been met, currently the rules state that the energy efficiency measures of the audit needs to be reevaluated to identify any further cost-effective energy efficiency measures, and those need to be installed. And then after 12 to 18 months post-implementation of those additional EEMs, measurement verification is to reoccur. This can kind of go on for the whole cycle. You got to report to Commerce annually when you do so. It is likely that additional cost-effective energy efficiency measures will not be likely to be found under further investigation a short period of time after the original energy audit and life cycle cost analysis. So we thought we would allow for an alternative compliance path, measurement verification compliance path. And this number 2 is verification of the energy savings using the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocols. So kind of doing a post-installation commissioning of those energy efficiency measures to assure that they are operating as intended. So this is introducing a alternative to having to reevaluate the energy audit for additional cost-effective energy efficiency measures if the original measurement verification does not provide that 75% savings. So not an added burden, but an added allowance to provide some flexibility. This is currently the measurement verification process for buildings that cannot measure an EUI, that are pursuing the investment criteria. And Judy, if you notice any comments that are just kind of clarifying, needing clarification of what I've spoken of, please let me know.
Yeah, I'm having a problem with the Q&A, so Donnie and Annika as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
Close this.
There are some questions that came in for the Q&A. So regarding connected buildings, am I understanding this right? That if a connected buildings are all allowed by the same owner, there's no need for submetering at all?
I want to field all the
Or
questions.
all owned, sorry, all owned by the same owner.
Yeah, Annika, I think what I'll do is I'll field those connected building questions when we get to more of the connected building content.
Okay.
Or probably, if there's several of them, let's just do it at the end of this this presentation, so they'll run through the proposals, and we can jog back to the specific section areas if need be.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have developed an allowance for the energy management plan's requirements for lighting schedule. Currently, the lighting schedule is required for all Tier 1 covered buildings. We have provided these exceptions for the lighting schedule for Tier 1 buildings, so buildings that meet the EUIT. So if you're already in compliance with the energy and use intensity target, a detailed lighting schedule does not have the cost to benefit. It's likely that a lighting measure has already been implemented, or the building is new enough that it's not likely that a detailed lighting schedule is going to lead to energy efficiency measures related to lighting. So buildings that meet the EUIT are exempt from a lighting schedule requirements, the EMP, and also buildings that have implemented a utility program lighting upgrade that covers at least 75% of the building's gross floor area within the last 5 years. So current lighting schedule through that program would suffice for the requirements of 5.1.2.12. Again, this is something we're not going to require for Tier 2 covered buildings, or we have proposed not to require that for Tier 2. The lighting satisfaction survey has pretty much the same exceptions. So if the building meets EUIT, I did provide a little bit of an edit to the proposals you guys received for this workshop, the document. Buildings that have implemented a utility lighting upgrade covering 75% of the building's GFA through a utility program within the previous 5 years, they would be exempt. It was a mistake to add that can use the lighting schedule provided by the building utility. We're not expecting the lighting schedule from the utility program to cover the lighting satisfaction survey. But again, the lighting satisfaction survey is a good way to develop and understand the effectiveness of the building's lighting, which can lead to lighting energy savings. That's all stuff that utility programs will pursuing as well. Okay, here's an amendment that provides more flexibility. So the energy manager shall provide, originally it says a copy of the energy management plan. We are more specific in saying access to the energy management plan to the building occupants and the stakeholders annually. So this is just to bring some clarity that they don't actually need to have a printed copy of the energy management plan, but access to it. So the building occupants and other stakeholders should be granted access to that. All right, so I told you we were talking a little bit more about connected buildings. here in 5.2.1.1, where energy consumption is not monitored at the covered building level, there is an allowance. As you can see, the term may, allowance for affected buildings to comply with tier 1 requirements at the connected building level. So it's based on the energy use intensity target pathway. And I also just wanted to bring out here that the original presented proposal from our tier 2 workshops that introduced the connected building level. We simplified that a little bit once we developed this tier 1 proposal. So you'll see that in tier 2, in lieu of sub-metering connected buildings, we're saying that they shall benchmark the building based on the connected building level so that we can get some EUI data at the connected building level.
So Luke, do you want the clarification requests now while you're here?
Sure, let's go ahead and take care of this.
So there's a bunch in the chat and I don't have access to the Q&A. So Annika, I'll pick up
I'll take
after.
care of the Q&A.
Fantastic. Mike is asking the question regarding connected buildings. Previously, only K-12 buildings could comply as a connected building via the guidance document, and he linked it. But now it sounds like buildings can comply using this strategy.
Yeah,
And
this is the proposal that we're putting forward. We will appreciate comment, either supporting this or against this. We feel that it provides some flexibility. There are complications to sub-metering buildings in order to comply through the EUIT pathway. Again, there is an alternative already set up, which is the investment criteria. And that investment criteria would require the level 2 energy audit and implementation of all cost-effective energy efficiency measures. This connected building level just gives you one more kind of pathway for compliance, provides some flexibility. So you could still choose to sub-meter the building, comply through the EUIT just for that covered building. Or you could still pursue the investment criteria.
So you answered the next clarification questions, but I'm going to ask them anyway.
Okay.
Nathan asked, does this open up using the EUIT path for connected buildings with a shared meter as opposed to needing to go to the investment criteria route?
Right, yeah. So it's
right.
another pathway.
And again, Adam asked, connected buildings, am I understanding this right? If I have a connected building, are all owned by the same owner, there is no need for sub-metering at all?
So, yeah, the way the proposal is structured is that would be true. So if you have a group of buildings that are interconnected by meter, such as in the graphic that Donnie showed in the PowerPoint earlier this morning, those buildings could apply as at that level, the connected building level. And that may include tier 2 buildings. It may include tier 1 buildings.
Which leads me right into the next clarification. This is perfect. And I think Nicole was talking about the previous slide with the connected buildings, but I'm not sure. For the previous slide, am I understanding right that tier 2 building must comply on the timeline for the tier 1 building? In other words, tier 1, oh, that's weird.
Yes.
The 2 building complies early.
Yeah, so if, for example, we have the building owner chooses to comply through this connected building level, their compliance date would be based on the largest of the covered buildings. So if that means they have a 200, let's say 230,000 square foot building that's connected to maybe some tier 2 buildings, or maybe some buildings that are not even covered buildings. Compliance date would be based on that largest building. So the 230,000 square foot building, as we know, has a compliance date of June 1st of 2026. So that whole connected building level would need to be complied by that date.
And on the flip side, if the largest cohort was 50 to 90, that date is 2028, which is after the tier 2.
Correct.
So some coordination would need. That's all I have in the chat. So I know
Yeah, and
Annika-
keep in mind, you know, tier 2 requirements are benchmarking, energy management plan, and operations and maintenance program. The only attribute it doesn't have that tier 1 has is that performance metric. And if they're pursuing through the connected building level, that would be the energy use intensity target. So you get to aggregate the GFA of all the connected buildings in order to properly represent EUI associated with that meter that connects all buildings. What this will do is include more buildings or more square footage into the tier 2 performance metric. So, which could be helpful actually when you're developing an energy use intensity for the building. If the connected building that is not a tier 1 building is not necessarily high energy use intensity relative to its building activity, it might actually benefit to pursue the EUI target at a connected building level. But it also may be a detriment. So this is where the qualified person really comes in to help the building owner understand what would be the most effective way to meet compliance with tier 1 requirements.
I think, Luke, with all this discussion and this interest in connected buildings, whether you're supportive of it or not, or you feel like we need edits to the definition, we hope you can submit comments for support or edits, because that's how we can justify codifying it or making adjustments to for compliance. So I just wanted to mention that. And it seems like it's such a big topic and there's a lot of variables that can be part of it. Soon enough, when it is codified, we will have an FAQ, whether it be live or as just a document, just to help you kind of guide your decisions with compliance. So we have some questions in the Q&A part. Do you want to address those?
If they're related to connected buildings. Yep.
So here's one, let's see. Questions regarding connected buildings previously on K-12 could comply as a connected building, AKA campus, per the guidance document below. It now sounds like all building types can comply using this method.
Now, this proposal would allow all buildings that are metered together with one meter connecting several buildings to pursue the EUIT path at that level rather than submetering individual buildings or pursuing the investment criteria for that covered tier 1 building.
Here's another one. We have several scenarios where there would be connected buildings via shared energy metering with multiple owners. Some of these owner groups have an owners association that is meant to be a partnership when they have shared responsibilities. Would there be any consideration for an owners association to be considered the responsible party for reporting connected buildings owned by separate owners?
Yeah, I think there is definitely some flexibility available there. You know, if building owners want to combine their efforts, because they may have connected buildings or well, Adam, I think we'll have to think about that a little bit more, but as we have defined connected buildings, if you're going to comply at that level, it needs to be of sole ownership. However, if you have a building complex, so to a degree, you have a building complex of buildings interconnected through conditioned space that aren't of sole ownership. Let's say you have a hospital with interconnected through conditioned space, but different entities own different parts of the building. According to the standard as written, those individual ownerships would represent a covered building, or that's where the GFA would be added in. We would provide an allowance for a building complex to comply together as one entity if they're set up with that responsibility. I think I'm going to have to put a little bit more thought into how that would work out at the connected building level. If anybody else from the commerce team has any input on that, please speak up. If not, Adam will certainly respond to that.
Yeah, Adam, you give us some good perspective on your side. If you could submit it as a comment in your thoughts, it's very helpful to get these things on writing because we have conversations with several people, and having it in writing just gives us a better point so we can address it.
And Annalyn, just to reinforce, this is a proposal that we're putting forward based on feedback and a lot of discussions that we've had with building owners and professionals over the last several years. We really would like your input on this. If this is going to be a helpful option, tell us more about that. If there's other areas we need to consider, again, like we really need that input.
I just posted the public comment form link in the chat again.
Thanks, Judy.
Okay.
So the next question, I think Judy recited this already from Nathan. Does that look familiar?
Yep.
Okay.
I think we've answered that one. I've been a different
Christine?
person. But
Yeah. Okay. I think we've covered. Is there other connected building questions in the chat?
There are, and this is there's one of appreciation. Yes, this is typically a healthcare scenario with connected buildings, not always a building complex. Appreciate the consideration and looking forward to the future discussion on multiple owners for connected buildings. That's from Adam. And then Daryl had another more complicated scenario. Luke, could you describe the connected buildings where, say, gas and electric energy sources are imported into the buildings, but the building cohorts are different?
So I'm taking that this question is relative to the compliance dates. So, and I think I handled that question, but I'll restate it. Daryl, if I got the question wrong, let me know. But when a group of buildings are sharing energy meters, the connected building would be at the most disaggregated level in order to get an accurate EUI for that group of buildings. That may contain several different cohorts of building size, right? We've got the 50 to 90, the 90 to 220, and then the 220,000 and greater. So these three different compliance states for tier 1 buildings. And then of course you got tier 2 in there too. So the compliance state would be based on the largest of any of the individual covered buildings within that group of connected buildings.
Luke, my interest in that question is the EUI. And my understanding is that we might have a gas meter that interconnects and then electricity individual per building. But when we determine the EUI, we would take all of the energy, the per building electricity and the connected gas for the whole square foot, and that would determine the EUI.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So if there is one meter, let's just say you're all individually metered electrically, but you may share, all those buildings share one gas meter. The only way to create the EUI for any of those buildings is either to sub-meter out that gas meter to each individual covered building, or to do an aggregate for those connected buildings.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay, thank you. That is the intent of this allowance. Or pathway.
So Jenna just asked a question, but it's a campus, and campus is a little different than connected buildings, but I'm going to read it just so that.
Okay.
Would the aggregate square footage of a campus include any size covered structure that draws energy? Example, sports sheds, AG barns, greenhouses, portables?
Yeah, so currently the rules do not include campus as the term campus as we typically define it. The definition within this standard has been altered in order to narrow a campus down to a group of buildings that are served by a district heating and or cooling system. So as far as creating a EUI for a campus, typically only if you were to do that, it would be based on the conditioned envelope GFA, not outside spaces. Per the guidance provided by Energy Star portfolio manager is usually appropriate. Again, since we haven't allowed for campus level compliance to this point, those details are less known. But I do have a proposal coming up that talks a little bit about campus level compliance that we'll share with you. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about your question at that point.
Okay, we have one more question regarding connected buildings. So for Christine, if a building owner with a tier 1 and a tier 2 connected buildings pursue the connected buildings compliance option, can they get incentives for both tier 1 and tier 2?
No, not likely. The incentive guidelines are developed outside of rulemaking, but it's my belief that those would not be additive. Tier 1 is, but if like I said, we haven't developed the tier 2 incentive guidelines yet. So if you have some comments that can help justify doing an additive, we could see if we're legislatively allowed to do such, but it might be a hard tail to twist.
Okay, so connected buildings. If we get any more questions, we'll address it in the end, but I'm gonna allow Luke to just continue on with his explanation of the proposed documents. Go ahead, Luke.
Okay, so here's another 5.2.1.2 and use deductions. We have introduced this to add clarity. As we know, the EUI is developed based on all the energy sources imported to the building, minus any energy production exported. So typically that's renewables, right? You got on-site solar, you've got on-site wind. You can deduct any of that energy that's exported back to the grid from your EUI development. It's based on the net energy definition of an EUI. It wasn't very clear within the standard whether the energy from electric vehicles can be deducted. And it is our understanding that the electric vehicle charger energy is energy that is essentially exported from the site via these vehicles. So that can be deducted from the EUI development. So we wanted to codify that and clarify that. We also wanted to add some electric loads that are typically not associated with the building use, such as broadcast antennas, on-site cell towers, and other communications equipment unrelated to the primary purpose of the building. So we wanted to codify that those such things can be deducted from the EUI. For example, there are plenty of portfolios of buildings. Let's use a higher ed campus, for example, that have contracts to house on-site cell towers that are owned by a third party and they're mounted on a building using energy from that building. And I'm not sure contractually how that works out, but Energy Star guidance is to be able to deduct those uses from the EUI development, and we agree with that. This is just our proposal, so your comments are appreciated. And the item number 3 here, we just added that the AHA may add additional end-use deductions based on technological advancements. So if there's some kind of new technology or use of technology on these buildings in the future, we can provide some guidance on whether we would allow deduction of that depending on circumstances.
You know what I think of? Flying car charging stations.
Flying car charging
Yeah,
stations.
I think that might fall under this, so.
Could be. All right, let's see. Moving on. There were some concerns. You know, part of this rule development is we did our best during tier 1 to get the rules appropriate. And we really relied on comments from the industry professionals and the stakeholders to kind of identify any complications. And this was one area that was. So this was the owner provided meter requirements. So if the owner is going to submeter their building, as the rules are written now, the equipment needs to be in compliance with Title 480 WAC, which is essentially utility grade meters. And the WAC is written really towards that purpose for utilities. We have since found that that's a little bit overkill for builder provided or owner provided meters. And so we have, we're suggesting that in lieu of Title 480 WAC, building owners can comply with the Washington State Energy Codes provisions for owner provided meters. Okay, so another change here. We wanted to just include a little more flexibility instead of identifying lighting power by the IES Lighting Handbook 4. It can also be done by the latest version of the Washington State Energy Code. That we know gets updated every 3 years. We have also added some language to further clarify how to define building activity types. We had previously introduced this for tier 2. It also affects tier 1. We changed the language a little bit from our original presentation of that proposal. Here is another tier 2 requirement that we previously proposed. We changed the language a little bit here. It really doesn't change the meaning of the proposal. It just provides better language to clarify that what we're looking for in tier 2, if a energy use intensity target is not able to be produced in compliance with the clean building standard, we would like the reporting of Energy Star portfolio managers meeting in site EY, which is portfolio managers EUIT, essentially. This happens automatically when people produce their Energy Star portfolio manager account, so it doesn't really add any additional work. It just states that that's where we're gonna find the EUI target when that target cannot be developed in compliance with section 7.2 of the standard.
Hey, Luke, section 7.2 also had a reference to connected buildings and developing targets.
Oh, here we go. Thank you.
Yep.
So this is a tier 2 proposal that we previously introduced, but thanks for pointing that out, Donnie. It just states that we would like to see that tier 2 buildings that cannot create a target or cannot create target, or if they're pursuing benchmarking, oh, excuse me, this affects tier 1 too. So if you're pursuing benchmarking or tier 1 compliance at the connected building level, this just provides some clarity saying that that target needs to be developed at that connected building level too, which is spoken indirectly through the standard, but this just kind of further clarifies that requirement. These are just some additions to language to further clarify the energy audit requirements. Really doesn't change the requirements. It's specifically stating level 2 audits, when Form D is required for reporting and so forth. We have also introduced a proposal to expand the useful life of an energy audit to 5 years, 3. We were getting the question of when does that 3 years start? Can we use a energy audit that was produced 3 years prior to when we make the building improvement plan, or does it need to be 3 years prior to the compliance date? Our feeling is that really the intent is we don't want folks to use an energy audit that's so old that it's not relevant to the work that's going to be done. And we know it takes some time to do an energy audit, create a building improvement plan, and implement the improvement plan, and then do the measurement verification. That process itself can take 5 years, anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So we wanted to be more specific that if we allow for 5 years, it really takes that question away of whether it's based on the compliance date or when the work is started. Another reference to that building energy audit use. All right, so we have, this was something that was overlooked in the initial tier one requirements. And if we do move this connected building definition and allowance through and codify it, that will basically represent the intent of this section 9.1.2.2, which talks about multiple building plan for coordinated energy efficiency measures. Essentially, you're creating a building improvement plan based on the level of compliance you're at. And this is something that's going to be affected through the Senate Bill 1390 or House Bill 1390. House Bill 1390, which is the decarbonization plan for campuses, as defined by Clean Building Standard, which is buildings connected to a central or district heating and cooling system. So normative Annex C was ASHRAE's original home for general compliance forms. We have moved that to Annex C. The original WAC referenced Z7, but it's actually Z6, so we corrected that. We also noted that Annex Y is our compliance, general compliance section for tier 2 buildings. Just adding clarity there. Again, just adding clarity based on the influence of House Bill 5722. This is Annex X, so the investment criteria, we didn't make any changes to that. This is just a title change to distinguish tier 1 reporting requirements from tier 2. Deletion of the commercial out of covered commercial buildings now that we reference them as covered buildings. So here in Annex Z, we're not necessarily identifying every tier 1 change with this pink highlight. It's just kind of assume that we know that Annex Z applies only to tier 1 buildings. So just assume that every edit here is a tier 1 edit.
And Luke, just to add to that, the only exception are the tables, because the tier 2
correct.
can use the tables at the end.
Yeah, so we've only published the tables 7-1, 2A, and 3 in Annex Z, but they do apply to Annex Y, and Annex Y references those tables. Thank you, Judy. We just added some language for clarity here. It didn't currently state that you can comply through the investment criteria in this section. we added that so it would be clear. Again, the covered buildings compliant at the connected building level, campus level, shall use the compliance schedule representing the largest covered building. You may notice we have this term campus level here. That is in reference to a proposal we have further on down here that would allow certain building activity types to comply at the campus level. And I'm going to speak of those in detail when we get to it in table 7-1. Again, here's this reference to the exemption application date emergency rule. So now you can apply 3 years prior to your designated compliance date. We've added a bunch of titles to sections just to add for some clarity. Some new language from the exemption application emergency rule requires kind of an attestation that you still meet the requirements of the exemption 180 days prior to the compliance date. And that's based on that emergency rule language. Okay, so we took a look at the existing exemptions for Tier 1 and how the introduction of Tier 2 requirements may affect them. And so we've had some proposed edits to the exemptions, and we would love to have feedback from folks. But it is our belief that the intent of the legislation, these edits fit nicely in there. So, for example, the building did not have physical occupancy by the owner or tenant for at least 50% of the conditioned floor area, they would be exempt. Now, let's say that's a 80,000 square foot building and 50% is not occupied. And so they would meet the Tier 1 exemption requirement. The question was, well, do they need to meet the Tier 2 requirements? And it's our opinion that they would need to meet the Tier 2 requirements. So benchmarking, energy management plan and operations maintenance program for that occupied space. Now, again, these are proposals. So your comments would be appreciated. Similar for buildings applying for exemption because of unconditioned and semi-heated space. That if the remaining unconditioned and semi-heated space was greater than 20,000, they would need to apply with the Tier 2 requirements. And then similar for the manufacturing industrial building, if they had, they ended up with floor area greater than 20,000 square feet that did not meet the exemption, then they would need to apply with Tier 2 requirements. Again, just adding some titles, sections. Just more detailed clarification that's stating that the operations and maintenance program is being implemented. It's a requirement. This proposal would allow, currently we allow phased implementation, which is where the building owner may include can defer the installation of an identified energy efficiency measure to the date, if it's not beyond its useful life. So if I got a boiler that if I replace, it's identified as a energy efficiency measure, I can delay that replacement based on the qualified person's designation of whether it's at its end of its useful life. So if it's got 5 years left, I would be able to defer that for 5 years. That allowance is currently allowed through the investment criteria. And this proposal would allow it through the energy use intensity target criteria through conditional compliance. So an energy audit would still need to be performed. And that energy audit would show that that identified energy efficiency measure and that it still has some life left in it. That measure would then need to be identified in the energy management plan with the date of the planned date of replacement based on the end of its useful life. So this is the, we just add some language to phase implementation as it relates to the investment criteria, the conditional compliance, because we added that proposal to allow it for the energy use intensity target through conditional compliance. So again, if you chose to do phased implementation through the EUIT path, you would need to apply for conditional compliance, and you would not have full compliance, but you could avoid any penalty until you install that energy efficiency measure that's designated for phased implementation. We just added some titles for the penalty section. No changes to that, those requirements. These aren't new requirements, they're just formatted differently. Again, just trying to improve the language so it's more understandable. There's substantive changes to the requirements. All right, so this section was changed based on the influence of 5722. They changed a little bit of where the administrative penalties collected under this section will be deposited. So originally it was just the low income weatherization, and they added this let's see, what part is this? And reinvested in the clean buildings program where feasible. So that is language that was introduced through 5722 that applies to both tier 1 and tier 2. Okay, getting into the forms here, we added a few details to some of these forms. This is Form A, which is your general compliance.
That's
So-
just formatting. Just formatting.
This formatting there, that was already required. But here we have, for folks that are applying for compliance through conditional compliance, we realize that we need a little bit more information on Form A. We require Form A for conditional compliance applications. And we needed more information on these forms in order to properly account for the data and their compliance with the conditional compliance requirements.
There was a question on forms. You mind if we address it since
Sure.
we're in this topic?
Sure.
I think someone was asking for a copy of the forms. Let me see. I don't know if you saw that question, Judy. Did you see it in the chat?
I did not.
It's probably with the questions, the Q&A.
So while on
Where- it's right
go
here.
ahead.
Where can we get copies of Form A through F? So the standard in Annex Z has what the forms would be made up of, like the information that's going to be gathered through the forms. We're trying to incorporate the forms into the portal. So if you see it in the standard, you could kind of get kind of understanding of what information is going to be requested. And that's going to transfer into the portal right now. We do have a paper copy of Form A. However, again, we're trying to incorporate this into the portal just so that it could be easier and reduce the administrative burden when complying. So just stay tuned and you'll see it. I believe the life cycle cost analysis Form F.
Yep.
Form F is available. If you go to our document library, you'll see it in there. And Form D is the audit. And that's through the, what website is that?
Yeah, that's through DOE's Energy Asset Score tool. And there's a audit template that can be found on that website. And there's a specific report within that audit template for clean buildings.
Okay.
That information is all available on our website.
Thanks,
So-
Adam. Posted the link to the direct guidance document. I posted the link to all the guidance documents on our website that Luke and Annalyn are talking about. Sorry,
Thanks,
Donnie.
Judy.
Okay, so these are all data points that qualified persons can be gathering for compliance through the different compliance paths. Form A, we're just specifying that we need that baseline EUI, we need projected EUI for conditional compliance through meeting the EUIT or through the investment criteria. It's based on baseline KBTU and projected KBTU. Form B is the energy use intensity target form. It calculates and produces the target for you. We have this integrated into our portal currently.
Yes, that's correct. There is a calculator spreadsheet. It's not Form B, but it works in the same way in which you can use it to calculate your target.
Yeah, if you're curious about creating a target outside of the portal, you can use that tool for that. But Form B is the official energy use intensity target development form, which is integrated into our standard or our portal. We added a note here to just clarify that buildings located in climate zone 5C shall use climate zone 4C in development of the targets. 5C incorporates a few counties in the Olympic Peninsula area, but they're going to use the same climate zone EUI targets as 4C, which is 4C is essentially the west side of the Cascade. Just amending some of the instructions that was from ASHRAE's original Form B requirements that didn't make much sense once we made our amendments to Tier 1 in initial rulemaking. They referred to steps that were no longer part of the standard that were not adopted. So we just took that out for clarity. Added some language here. We do codify the proposal for connected buildings. It would represent them. We're getting close, folks. A lot of scrolling here without many changes. I just want to make sure we get them all. We mentioned the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. This is Form C, and it just kind of lists all the data points that Commerce has access to through Form C. When the applicant completes their Energy Star Portfolio Manager account for their building, they select Washington State Clean Buildings, Form C. This just is the data we have access to. Again, Portfolio Manager will calculate this based on all the information that you're putting in for other reasons. So this just gives us access to that. Okay, Form D. We added a little, Form D is required when to be submitted when your compliance path requires an energy audit, level 2 energy audit. That would be through the investment criteria or through the EUI, conditional compliance through the EUIT. We do want, there is a provision within the standard that allows you to eliminate the installation of energy efficiency measures that are not considered to have a simple payback that is greater than the energy efficiency measure's useful life. We just add this language in here because if there are any identified energy efficiency measures that are not implemented because they do not have a simple payback that's greater than the useful life, we want some documentation of that within that Form D audit report. We also put the similar language in here that we want to see we only want to see energy efficiency measures considered to have a simple payback that is less than the EM's useful life through Form F, which is the life cycle cost analysis tool. Any energy efficiency measure identified by the energy audit do not have a simple payback within the measure's useful life does not need to be entered into the life cycle cost analysis. This further clarifies. Just adding some section numbers that were not existing in the original rules. No substantive change. This was an error. We just need to admit that. Doesn't make any sense. We don't. Application of exemption does not need to be submitted to the building owner. Statement of cash flow, not base flow. Okay, so here we're getting into table 7-1. I told you that there is some proposals in here, and I don't necessarily have them noted in every page is 7-1. But let's go through it here. First of all, we took the commercial building activity out, and since it does incorporate multifamily, we just wanted to accurately represent that. We have changed the language a bit. We're introducing this table 7-4 that houses all the definitions for building activity types. Previously, 7.1.1 referenced all building activity definitions to be from Energy Star Portfolio Manager, except for where noted by this footnote. Data centers and urgent care centers are defined here. Energy Star Portfolio Manager identifies or defines most of the building activity types that we have listed in our tables, 7-1, 2A, and 3. But however, it doesn't provide all the definitions. So we have created our own document that is based off an Energy Star portfolio manager definitions, that adds definitions for building activity types that were not defined by portfolio manager or are defined differently by our standards, such as noted here as data center and urgent care center. So that complete list of definitions, table 7-4, will be presented at our next workshop, cumulative review. The 7-1 is just identifying all the different building activity types. Again, this is the same note we saw on the last page. It's just each page of the table needs to have that note. Moving on to 7-2A. This is where I've identified, or we have identified, building activities that we consider to be campuses under the traditional definition of campus, and where the EY target source data was derived from a kind of an aggregate campus level. So college, universities, K-12 schools, both the high school and elementary schools. That data was developed at a campus level. Whereas, something such as a roller rink, that data was based off of that specific building activity. So what this means is, we look at footnote 9 here. This building activity type may comply at a campus level with EUIT as a collection of buildings within a single shared primary function that act as a single property. So essentially, this proposal would allow these select building activities to comply with the standard through the EUI compliance path as a campus, as we traditionally define campus. And that's why we've called it campus level, because campus is already defined within the standard differently than what we intend here. The second footnote of note is this number 8. We've got a lot of comment and feedback from folks who have research laboratories on their in their portfolio of buildings. When it comes to a campus level, that campus level EUIT was derived on national and regional target data for is that me? For
Time for lunch.
an aggregate, like on average, universities across the country, they may have some research laboratories, but most, there's different densities of research laboratories throughout different campuses. So that research laboratories are can be a very high energy use intensity. So we've responded to the comments of these folks that if you actually have a campus that has these, you delete that. What could be considered a research laboratory? You can comply at the campus level, but you can do an area weighted EUIT to represent that actual research laboratory. So
There's a couple of questions if you want to.
sure, if they're related to this.
Yes.
subject.
So those buildings types can comply as a campus regardless of meter configuration. So if the buildings are individually metered, an owner can still roll everything up into one EUIT.
So that is, yes, that is how the proposal is presented. Again, there's only a few building activity types that this would apply to. I have that footnote number 9, and they're the building activities that we typically understand to be campuses. I'll go through a couple more here as we scroll through here, but you can imagine higher ed, college universities, as well as K-12 schools are typically that source data the targets was derived from was at a campus level. So that's as proposed.
Sorry. The second question, Luke, can you elaborate on single shared primary function term? If a middle school and a high school share the same property campus, say with a gym, building, and an auditorium, based on the proposed change, they could comply as one campus, EUIT, correct? Question mark?
Yeah, for example, K-12 school is going to have various different buildings. If you look at the definition of K-12 school within Energy Star Portfolio Manager, it kind of lists the different space uses or building activities within that definition. If there's anything outside of that on that campus, let's say, for example, you have an administrative building. Its primary function is not K-12 school. We'll have to provide some guidance, but it is our belief that you can, rather than complying, have the administrative building complying separately from the rest of the campus, there are avenues to pursue compliance with the campus at an area weighted average target. So you include the target of that administrative building relative to its floor area in development of the K-12 compliance. I hope that answers your question. And it's a good question. It brings up the fact that we should provide some clarifying guidance document for the nuances of complying at that level.
Yeah, that answered it. That was very helpful. Thank you, Luke. I think some guidance documents will be helpful moving forward.
Yeah. Right. Well,
I'm gonna note it time.
okay, I'm going to move on. I'm sorry we're going through this in detail. I'm glad we're able to answer some questions along the way. Again, we hope that everybody peruses this document in detail and provides some written comment. Here's an example of another campus. So we got that question earlier about hospitals at the connected building level. So this can help clarify, but we still need to talk about the multiple ownership. So prison incarceration, that's another building activity type we've identified as campus. Listed a couple times here, and you can see the new footnote associated with it, number 9. Same stuff, different page. This is the shift normalization factors. I don't think there's been any changes to this table. We did delete these shift normalization factors because there is no energy use intensity target for medical office. It's housed under either 53 or 51. So it was not needed there.
As you're scrolling, there is another laboratory scenario question.
Okay.
If you have a building,
I'm just about done here.
yeah, just finish.
So this is the last little note here. We're refining this building activity definitions table I spoke of. So we'll see that at the next cumulative review workshop.
Good job, Luke.
All right, Judy, go ahead.
All right. If you have a building that is 50% research laboratory and 50% teaching laboratory or classroom, then would you calculate the EUIT using 50% laboratory EUIT and 50% college university EUIT?
What I would suggest is typically when we're speaking of the laboratories, teaching laboratories and research laboratories together, they're typically going to be in an educational environment where that target was developed based on the campus-wide level, right? As I've stated. In that scenario, what we're saying is, if you have a building within that campus that has let's say the 102 target, you can do an area weighted average. So let's say 40,000 square feet on that campus's research laboratory, or 10,000 square feet. You can do the area weighted average using that defined research laboratory and using that higher energy use intensity target as represented in table 7-2A to represent the higher intensity use of that research laboratory. So that's the intent of that. If there's I don't think we're going to see too much educational laboratories outside of the education environment.
Okay, should we move on to the
Yep.
more questions?
Yep.
Okay. Are there any grants for nonprofits, 501c3s to fund these tier 1 energy updates?
Couple answers to this question. Annika, I'm going to put you on the spot to talk about the early adopter incentive program, if you don't mind. And then the only other thing that I would add is Department of Commerce has a retrofits for existing buildings, energy efficiency retrofits. So it's a grant program in which we put those opportunities out there based on available budget. So I'd encourage whoever asked that question to pop on Commerce's website, or we can put a link to that program in the chat. Annika, do you want to talk about the early adopter incentive program?
Sure. There is an incentive program for tier 1 buildings, so 50,000 square feet and greater. The incentive is 85 cents a square foot. You receive this incentive by meeting your building's energy use intensity target. So this is an incentive that is calculated based on your energy use reduced, and it's paid by your utility providing energy services to your building. So there is a guidebook that I'll post in the chat where it describes the process for applying to this program. But once again, you receive this incentive after your building meets its energy use intensity target, and you can provide us with 12 months of data showing that the building has met its target.
Awesome.
And
Thanks,
And
Annika.
Annika, as I recall, you need to be 15 points over the EUI in order to qualify for that.
that is correct. Thank you. So in order to qualify for this program, your building must be 15 energy EUI above its target. If you have any questions about this program, I will put the incentive program email in the chat, as well as the guidebook. Would love to spend some more time talking with you about it and see if your building could qualify.
Okay, thank you. We have quite a few questions. We may not get to all of them, but we will certainly try to get through most of them. So next question, what discussions are happening at the state level about preparing a workforce that can handle the amount of reporting for buildings?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a swing at this one. It's a great question and an area that we are doing a lot of thinking and would love to get input or recommendations from you all on how to approach that. Workforce is going to be a challenge as we go to implement requirements for tier 2 buildings, just because of the sheer number of buildings that are going to be covered. So we would love to see any kind of suggestions or ideas you have about that. We do have existing partnerships with the Smart Building Center, with many of our utility partners around the state that are all contributing and funding training to support the workforce for clean buildings compliance. And we know we still have a lot of work to do. Anything y'all would want to add to that? No? Okay.
Thanks, Emily. Next question. In 5.1.2.12, how will Commerce verify the building has participated in a lighting upgrade program? Does the building owner submit a letter from the utility, provide a copy of the incentive contract, etc.?
Yeah, we will have to develop that within our reporting requirements. Thanks for the note, Christine.
Next question for lighting, at 75% of building GFA, does this mean the exterior lighting is excluded?
So this is as proposed, yeah, it would not include that exterior, which can be significant impact. So Nicole, if you got any ideas on how maybe we can craft the language to include those exterior energy uses, so maybe I'm just not too sure how we would craft that language. Any ideas, that'd be great. We've got your comment now. So regardless if you send any ideas in, we will put some effort into that.
Thanks, Luke. Next question, 5.1.2.7 seems to indicate we need to track EEMs even if we meet EUI. Since we've implemented these voluntarily, I advocate we do not need the life cycle cost analysis form, but we'll list them per guidance in 5.1.2.7.
Yeah, no, good comment. You do not need to do a life cycle cost analysis unless you're pursuing conditional compliance through the investment criteria or through the investment criteria in general. So the energy management plan just states that ASHRAE, and that's per ASHRAE, is to have some kind of documentation of installed energy efficiency measures.
We're almost at time. You mind if I just go through the last few slides? And would you mind if we stay a little bit to answer these questions? If your question hasn't been answered, we're going to stay a few minutes longer, but I do want to just mention, Monica, can you bring back the slides? If you can, just so we could talk about next steps. Next slide, please. So again, thank you everyone who attended and participated and actively engaged with us. The recording and the slide deck will be available on the homepage. I'll also email it to you if you registered. Review the workshop materials, submit comments. We are so grateful for this engagement and your comments. Please register for the final workshop. As you can see, the engagement is so much better if it were in person. I am funnier in person, so please, I will be there. Please come and visit us. If you can't join us in person, join us virtually. Here are the dates and the location. It's also on our website. If your question hasn't been answered, stay a little bit longer and Luke will take care of that. So we're gonna stop recording, and thanks again for your participation. And stop recording. Thank you.
You're still funny virtually.